He built the system that protects millions of lives across America, and they stole it. They took his name off every file, every patent, every line of code he wrote across 3 brutal years. Then they handed him a cardboard box and walked him to the door like a stranger. Adrian Hale said nothing. He just picked up his daughter from daycare and went home. But when their empire starts to burn, and it will burn, there is only one man alive who knows how to save it, the man they threw away. If this story moves you, drop your city in the comments and hit that like button. Let's see how far this one travels. The box wasn't heavy. That was the thing Adrian kept thinking about as he carried it through the lobby of Vantex Systems headquarters on a Tuesday morning in March. 3 years of his life, and it all fit in a box that weighed maybe 4 pounds. A coffee mug, a photo of Lily at 18 months, gap-toothed and laughing at something off camera, a small succulent he'd kept on the corner of his desk because someone online said plants helped with stress, a charger cable, half a box of granola bars he'd never finished. The box didn't even have a lid. They'd handed it to him open, like they couldn't spare the 30 seconds to find one. He walked past the security desk. The guard, Marcus, looked up from his phone. Their eyes met. Marcus looked back down. Adrian pushed through the revolving door and stepped out into the cold. He stood on the sidewalk for a moment. The city moved around him. Taxis, delivery trucks, a woman speed-walking with a coffee in each hand, a bike messenger cutting between parked cars. Everyone going somewhere. The wind off the lake cut right through his jacket. He looked down at the succulent. Its little ceramic pot was chipped at the rim. He didn't even remember how that happened. He walked to his car. His name was Adrian Hale, and he was 35 years old, and he was very, very good at something that had just been taken away from him. He hadn't always been the kind of person people noticed. Growing up in a middle-class household in Cincinnati, he was the kid who sat in the back of class and finished tests 30 minutes early, and then spent the rest of the period reading a library book under the desk. Not because he was showing off, just because that was how his brain worked. It solved things, and then it got bored, and then it needed something else to solve. He'd gotten a full scholarship to study computer science at Northwestern. He'd graduated in 3 years. He'd turned down 2 job offers before accepting one at Vantex Systems because Vantex had a problem that genuinely interested him. Vantex was, in the corporate vocabulary of the time, a mid-sized technology infrastructure company. What that meant practically was that they provided the backbone systems for a significant portion of Chicago's critical services: hospital networks, financial clearing systems, emergency communications, utility management for 3 counties. The kind of invisible infrastructure that nobody thought about until it stopped working, at which point the consequences cascaded in ways that were very hard to explain and very easy to observe. Their security architecture, when Adrian arrived, was a disaster. Not a visible disaster. Not the kind of disaster that generates headlines and congressional hearings. The slow, compounding kind. A system built in pieces by different teams over 12 years, patched and repatched, until the patches had patches, where the right combination of failures could create gaps that nobody had mapped because nobody had ever looked at the whole thing all at once. Adrian looked at the whole thing all at once. It took him 6 months to fully understand what he was looking at. It took him another 2.5 years to replace it. What he built, and he built it largely alone, working nights and weekends, and the long, empty stretches after his wife fell asleep on the couch with a book on her chest, was something genuinely new. He called it internally, in the documentation he wrote for himself, the coherence architecture. It wasn't a catchy name. He didn't care about catchy names. What it was, technically, was an adaptive security framework that monitored, mapped, and responded to the Vantex network the way an immune system responded to a body. Constantly, intelligently, learning the difference between normal variation and genuine threat. He was proud of it, in the quiet way he was proud of most things he made. He didn't talk about it much. He wrote the documentation carefully, filed the patents under his own name, kept meticulous version records. He assumed this was all standard. He assumed a lot of things that turned out not to be true. The man who took it from him was named Derek Calloway. Calloway was Vantex's VP of engineering, which meant he was Adrian's direct superior, which meant he was the person Adrian reported to and the person whose name appeared above Adrian's in the organizational chart. He was 43, well-dressed in the way that people who think about being well-dressed are well-dressed, and he had a talent that Adrian genuinely lacked. He was extraordinarily good at being in a room. Meetings, presentations, conversations with the board. Calloway knew how to hold space, how to project authority, how to make other people feel that whatever he was telling them was the most important and sensible thing they'd heard all week. He had an instinct for the moment when someone needed to be told what they wanted to hear. Adrian had watched him operate for 3 years and never fully understood how he did it, only that it worked, and that it was a completely different skill set from anything Adrian possessed. What Adrian didn't understand until it was too late was how that skill set could be weaponized. The first sign was small. The quarterly engineering review in October of the second year, where Calloway presented the progress on what he called our next-generation security architecture to the executive team. Adrian wasn't in the meeting. He learned about it later, secondhand, from a colleague who mentioned it in passing. He didn't think much about it at the time. The second sign was the patent filings. Adrian discovered this almost by accident, running a routine check on IP documentation in January of year 3. The patents he'd filed under his own name had been refiled. His name had been removed. Calloway's name appeared instead, along with 2 engineers who had done peripheral work on components Adrian had built. Their contributions real but minor. Adrian went to HR. He was told the matter was under review. He was told this by a woman who couldn't quite meet his eyes. 3 weeks later, Calloway called him into his office and handed him the box. "We're restructuring the engineering division," Calloway said. He was looking at his desk, moving a pen between his fingers. "Your position is being eliminated." "My position," Adrian said. "It's not personal." Adrian looked at him for a long moment. He thought about all the things he could say. He thought about the documentation he had, the version records, the original patent filings, the hundreds of hours of time-stamped commits in the code repository. He thought about lawyers and HR and formal complaints and what any of that would actually accomplish versus what it would cost. He thought about Lily, who was 4.5 and whose daycare pickup was in 2 hours. "Okay," he said. He picked up the box and walked out. Home was a 2-bedroom apartment in Logan Square, 12 minutes from the daycare by car, 7 if the lights cooperated. The building was fine. Not nice, not terrible. The kind of place where the hallways always smelled faintly of someone else's cooking and the elevator worked maybe 80% of the time. He'd moved there after Rachel died because the old house had become impossible to be in. Too many rooms that felt like they were waiting for someone. Rachel had died 14 months before Calloway fired him. Ovarian cancer, diagnosed late, fought hard, and lost in 11 months. She was 33. She had been, in addition to being his wife, the funniest person he'd ever known, and the only human being who had ever made him feel like the social parts of himself that didn't quite work right were fine, actually, were even interesting, were not something that needed to be corrected. She left behind a daughter who looked exactly like her, and a husband who didn't know what to do with that. Lily had Rachel's dark eyes and her habit of tilting her head when she was thinking about something, and it was one of those things that could stop Adrian completely if he let himself look at it directly. He mostly tried not to. He took her to daycare, he picked her up, he made dinner, usually pasta, something simple, something he could do on autopilot, and he read to her before bed 2 books every night, her choice. She was currently very interested in a series about a dragon who kept accidentally setting things on fire and then having to apologize for it. He'd read the same 5 books in rotation for 2 months. The night he was fired, he made pasta with butter and parmesan because it was her favorite and he couldn't think of anything else. He sat across from her at the small kitchen table while she ate and watched cartoons on the tablet he'd propped against the fruit bowl, and he thought about the fact that he needed a job. "Daddy," Lily said, without looking up from the tablet. "Yeah. Are you sad?" He looked at her. She was still watching cartoons. She had parmesan on her chin. "A little bit," he said. She considered this. "Did something happen?" "I lost my job today." She looked at him then, with those dark eyes. "What does that mean?" "It means I won't be going to that office anymore. I'll be finding a new job." She thought about this for a moment. "Okay," she said, and went back to her cartoons. He wasn't sure if that made him feel better or worse. Maybe both. The weeks after were strange. He applied to positions. He had calls, interviews, follow-ups. His skills were real and demonstrable, and the market for someone who could do what he did was not exactly dry. But Calloway had been thorough. Vantech had been thorough. The patents, the documentation, the official record, All of it bore Calloway's name or the names of people who had worked under Calloway. When prospective employers asked about his work at Vantech, Adrian could gesture at it broadly, but couldn't point at anything specific. He couldn't say, "I built this." The paper trail said otherwise. He was careful not to talk about it too directly. He'd consulted a lawyer briefly, gotten a realistic assessment of what a lawsuit would involve. Years, money he didn't have, emotional territory he wasn't sure he could afford to walk through. He set it aside. Maybe later. Right now, he needed to put food on the table. He picked up contract work, enough to cover rent and daycare and the basics. He set up a small workspace in the corner of the living room, a desk and 2 monitors behind a folding divider so Lily wouldn't be distracted by it when she was watching TV. He worked when she was at daycare, sometimes past midnight when she was asleep. He didn't talk to many people. He hadn't ever been particularly good at maintaining friendships. Rachel had been better at that. She'd been the one who remembered birthdays and suggested dinner and kept the social calendar. Without her, he'd drifted. He texted with one friend from college, sporadically. He talked to his mother on Sundays. He talked to Lily constantly, about everything and nothing. He'd read somewhere that talking to young children, just narrating the world around them, was good for language development. And so he'd developed the habit of explaining what he was doing as he did it, a running commentary that she seemed to find alternately interesting and boring in equal measure. He built a life that fit inside a fairly small space. It wasn't the life he'd imagined, but it was functional. It had a shape. He told himself that was enough. The morning everything changed, he was troubleshooting a routing problem for a contract client while Lily ate cereal across the kitchen table and described to him, in considerable detail, the injustice that had occurred at daycare the previous day involving a red tricycle and someone named Marcus, who apparently was not to be trusted. And then, Lily said, he just took it. He just took the tricycle, even though I was using it. "What did you do?" Adrian asked, typing. "I told the teacher. Good call. She said we had to share." Lily looked deeply unhappy about this. "I don't think that was fair." "Sharing usually isn't fair in the short term," Adrian said. "It's more of a long-term investment." Lily stared at him. "Daddy, I'm 5. Almost 5. Still 5. His phone rang. He glanced at it. Unknown number, Chicago area code. He almost let it go to voicemail. He'd been getting a lot of spam calls lately. He answered it. "Mr. Hale," a woman's voice. Precise, not unfriendly, slightly formal. "My name is Evelyn Cross. I'm the CEO of Vantech Systems. I'm hoping you have a few minutes." He sat back slowly. Lily was looking at him with the alert expression she got when she sensed something shifting in the room. "I know who you are," he said. Her appointment had been in the news. The board bringing in an outsider, a turnaround specialist, someone with a reputation for not caring what people thought of her. He hadn't followed it closely. He hadn't wanted anything to do with Vantech. "Then you may also know," Evelyn Cross said, "that we're in a significant amount of trouble." Adrian was quiet for a moment. Outside, a city bus rumbled past the window. Lily was still watching him, cereal spoon halfway to her mouth. "I'd heard something," he said carefully. "The security network is failing," she said. It was a flat statement, matter of fact, the way you talked about something when you were past the point of softening it. "We've had 3 major incidents in 6 days. Our engineering team cannot stabilize it. 2 hospitals and a financial clearinghouse are currently operating on backup protocols that are not rated for extended use." A brief pause. "I found your records, Mr. Hale. The original ones. The version history, the commit logs, the patent applications before they were amended. I know what you built, and I know what was done to you." Adrian said nothing. "I'm not calling to apologize on behalf of the company," she continued. "I don't have the standing to do that, and I think you'd find it hollow anyway. I'm calling because your system is collapsing, people are at risk, and you're the only person alive who understands how it actually works. I need your help." He looked at Lily, who had finally resumed eating her cereal and was now watching cartoons on the tablet, apparently deciding the moment wasn't interesting enough to keep monitoring. He thought about everything he'd walked away from, about the box with the chipped succulent pot, about the lawyer's assessment delivered in a neutral tone in a fluorescent-lit office, about years and money and the realistic likelihood of any particular outcome, about what it had cost him to carry that quietly for the better part of a year. "If I do this," he said slowly, "I want the truth on record. Everything. My name restored to every system, every patent, every document I created. Not after, during, as part of the terms. I'll have a contract drawn up today, she said. He turned that over. You didn't argue. No. Why? Because you're right, she said. And because I need someone I can actually trust in that building, and I think you've already demonstrated that you're not the person who's going to lie to me. Adrian Hale looked around his living room, the folding divider, the two monitors, the small messy evidence of a life reassembled from whatever had survived. I'll need flexibility for my daughter's schedule, he said. She has daycare until 3. I pick her up at 3. That's not negotiable. A brief pause on the other end, then, that's not a problem, Mr. Hale. He exhaled slowly. I'll come in tomorrow. After he hung up, Lily looked at him over her cereal bowl. Who was that? Someone who needs help. Are you going to help them? He thought about Evelyn Cross's voice, the careful evenness of it, the thing underneath it that was not quite desperation, but was the controlled version of desperation, the way someone sounds when they know exactly how serious the situation is and have decided that falling apart is not going to be useful. Yeah, he said. I think I am. Lily nodded seriously, like this was the correct answer, and went back to her cartoons. Adrian sat there for another minute, looking at nothing in particular, the coffee going cold in his hand. Then he opened a new window on his laptop and started making a list. He drove to Vantech the next morning with Lily in the back seat, still in her pajamas because she'd refused to get dressed until after breakfast. And then breakfast had taken longer than expected because she'd decided her cereal needed to be arranged by color before she could eat it. You can't wear pajamas to daycare, he told her, watching her in the rearview mirror. Why not? Because that's not how daycare works. Mrs. Patterson wears comfortable clothes. Mrs. Patterson is a teacher. Teachers have different rules. Lily considered this with the expression she had when she was filing information away for later use in an argument. I want different rules too. He dropped her off at 7:45, navigated the morning traffic on the Kennedy, and pulled into Vantech's parking structure at 8:22. He sat in the car for a minute. The building looked the same. Of course it looked the same. It had been less than a year. But something in him had expected it to look different, or to feel different sitting here, and it didn't, and that was its own kind of disorienting. He picked up his contractor badge from the front desk, not the same guard, a different one, and took the elevator to the 4th floor. Evelyn Cross was already in the main conference room. He recognized her from photographs, but photographs hadn't captured the economy of how she moved through space, the way she positioned her wheelchair at the head of the table, not like someone accommodating a limitation, but like someone who had decided exactly where they were going to be and arrived there with complete intention. She was younger looking in person than he'd expected. She had a sharp, precise face, dark hair pulled back, and she was reading something on a tablet with the focused expression of someone who had about 6 things happening in parallel and was managing all of them. She looked up when he came in. Mr. Hale. She set the tablet down. Thank you for coming. Adrian is fine, he said, because Mr. Hale already felt like a formality he didn't have the patience for. Evelyn, she said, not a negotiation, just the same exchange, offered back. Sit down. I want to show you something before the engineering team arrives. He sat. She turned her tablet toward him. It was a system dashboard, one he recognized immediately, the way you recognize your own handwriting. The coherence architecture monitoring interface, the one he'd designed to give a bird's-eye view of the network's health across all integrated systems. Except right now it looked like a patient in triage, red across almost 40% of the status indicators, amber on another 25. The cascade fault pattern in the southeastern hospital cluster was one he'd theorized about during the original build, a theoretical vulnerability he'd documented and flagged, and then patched before the system went live. Except somehow, the patch was gone. Not corrupted. Removed. Who's been maintaining this, he asked, before he'd fully processed he was going to say it. That's a complicated question, Evelyn said, and her tone made it clear the complexity was not accidental. He studied the dashboard for another 30 seconds. The failure wasn't random decay. That was the thing that hit him first and sat badly. Network systems that degrade through neglect fail in particular ways, entropic ways, spread across their weakest points. This had a different shape. Concentrated. Like something had been selectively dismantled. When did the first incident occur, he asked. 6 days ago, 7-minute outage at Northwestern Memorial's administrative network. Backup systems kicked in, officially logged as a routine maintenance fault. And the second? 4 days ago. The Central Clearing Exchange lost connectivity for 11 minutes, 600,000 transactions in a holding queue. The exchange attributed it publicly to a vendor issue. She paused. The third was 2 days ago and was neither brief nor attributable to anything the engineering team could explain. 43 minutes, 2 hospital systems, and an emergency dispatch network running on contingency. Our CTO has been telling the board it's contained. Another pause, shorter. It is not contained. Adrian leaned back. And your CTO is reporting to the board that he has it handled, Evelyn said evenly, and has been doing so since day one. I was brought in 5 weeks ago. I've been told repeatedly and with considerable confidence that the security issues are a known quantity and are being addressed. She looked at him steadily. I started pulling original source code 3 weeks ago because I have a policy of not accepting "we have it handled" from someone who can't show me evidence. And that's when you found my records. That's when I found your records. He was quiet for a moment. The CTO, is that Calloway? Derek Calloway was promoted to Chief Technology Officer approximately 8 months ago, she said. He stepped down voluntarily the day I was appointed CEO. The timing was, I think, not coincidental. Adrian processed that. Calloway had seen her coming and gotten out. Smart move in its way. He's gone from the company? Adrian asked. He has gone from the company, Evelyn confirmed. He has not, however, gone from the situation. He retained significant equity when he left. And he has several allies on the board who have been very interested in managing the narrative around the current technical difficulties. She said the last 2 words with a very particular dryness. Which brings me to why I needed you specifically, and not a general security contractor. She turned the tablet back toward herself and pulled up a different screen. A document, dense with technical annotation. I need someone who understands what this system was supposed to do, not what it's been documented as doing. The documentation, I've come to understand, is incomplete and in several places actively misleading. I need someone who knows the original design intent, because I think the failures we're seeing are not maintenance failures. Adrian felt something cold settle in his chest. You think they're deliberate? I think, Evelyn said carefully, that the pattern of degradation is difficult to explain through negligence alone. I think that someone with intimate knowledge of your system's architecture would know exactly which components to allow to fail in order to create instability without triggering immediate visible collapse. She paused. I want to be clear that I have no evidence for this at the level I'd need to take it to the board. What I have is a pattern that doesn't make sense, and an engineer telling me everything is under control when the dashboard is showing me 40% red. Adrian looked at the dashboard again. He thought about the patch he'd built for the Southeastern Hospital cluster. Documented, implemented, tested. Gone now. If someone removed that patch intentionally, he said slowly, they would have needed deep access, admin level, root credential access to the core architecture. Who had that access when you were here? Me, he said, and Calloway. Evelyn didn't say anything to that. She didn't need to. The engineering team arrived at 8:45. 5 people, varied levels of obvious anxiety, filing into the conference room with laptops and the specific energy of people who had been running on adrenaline and were not winning. Adrian recognized 2 of them from his time at the company. The others were newer, brought in after he'd left. A man named Preston, mid-30s with the slightly manic look of someone who hadn't slept in 4 days, apparently functioned as the de facto team lead. He introduced himself, saw Adrian, and did a very brief but visible recalibration of his expression. You're Adrian Hale, Preston said. Yeah. You built the original architecture. Yeah, Preston exhaled through his nose. It was not a happy sound. Okay, he said. That's actually... Yeah, okay. The meeting ran for 2 hours. Adrian mostly listened, asking questions occasionally, precise questions that he could see made some of the engineers slightly uncomfortable in the way that precise questions make you uncomfortable when they reveal that you don't know the answer to something you should know. He wasn't trying to make anyone feel bad. He was trying to map what they knew against what he knew and locate the distance between those 2 things. The distance was significant. The engineers knew the system the way you know a house you've rented. The rooms, the switches, the approximate location of the breaker panel. They didn't know the load-bearing walls. They didn't know which things you absolutely could not touch without understanding why they were there. They'd been maintaining a system they'd inherited without ever having had the chance to understand what it was actually doing. He didn't say any of this out loud. It wasn't their fault. It was the natural consequence of handing complex infrastructure to people without proper documentation, which was the natural consequence of the person who held all the knowledge being removed from the building. After the engineering team left, Evelyn looked at him across the empty conference room. "How bad is it?" "Bad enough," he said. "I need a few days with the source code before I can give you specifics." "We don't have a lot of days." "I know." He looked at the dashboard, still up on her tablet screen. "The Southeastern Hospital cluster is my primary concern. The failure I'm seeing there isn't a maintenance gap. That's a patch removal. I built that fix 18 months ago. It was stable when I left. If it's gone now, someone took it out." Evelyn's expression didn't change in any dramatic way. It sharpened slightly, the way a lens sharpens when you turn the focus ring. "Can you put it back?" she asked. "Yes, but if I put it back without understanding the full current state of the system, I could destabilize something else. It's like—" He paused, reached for the right analogy. "The system I built was designed to be interdependent. Components talk to each other. If you remove a piece and other components have adapted to work around its absence, restoring it without accounting for those adaptations can cause cascade failures. So you need to assess the full system before making changes. I need to assess what they've done to it since I left, and I need access to everything. Every change log, every maintenance record, every update that's been applied in the last 3 years. You'll have it," she said, "whatever you need." He believed her. That was the thing. She said it without the particular quality of assurance that people use when they're not sure they can deliver. It was a flat statement of fact. "I'll need my own workstation," he said, "isolated, air-gapped from the main engineering terminals. I don't want what I'm doing visible to the team until I understand the situation better." She raised an eyebrow very slightly. "You think someone on the engineering team is involved?" "I think I don't know yet," he said. "I'd rather be cautious." She nodded once. "You'll have a workspace set up before end of day." He stood to leave, then stopped. "One more thing. The contract terms we discussed, the patent restoration, the official record. My attorney is drafting it today," she said. "You'll have it to review by tomorrow morning." He looked at her for a moment. She met his gaze without any particular expression. She was just there, steady and direct, in the way of someone who had learned that most things that unsettled other people were not worth being unsettled by. "Why did you take this job?" he asked. It was an abrupt question, not especially polite, and he asked it partly because he was genuinely curious, and partly because he'd gotten used to not worrying about whether his questions were polite. She didn't seem bothered by it. "Because the company was failing for reasons that were fixable," she said. "And I don't like it when fixable things fail because nobody wanted to do the work." He considered that. Even if the fixable thing involves a board that doesn't particularly want the real problems fixed? A pause. Then, with the faintest trace of something that might have been rye, especially then, he picked up his laptop bag. "I'll see you tomorrow." No. He picked Lily up at 3. She was in the parking lot of the daycare when he arrived, sitting on a low concrete wall next to Mrs. Patterson, eating half a graham cracker with the deliberate concentration of someone who was making it last as long as possible. "Daddy." She held up the remaining cracker fragment. "I saved you the other half." "Thank you." He took it, ate it, honey-flavored. "How was the new work?" she asked as he buckled her into her car seat. "Complicated." "What does that mean?" "It means it's a big problem, and I'm figuring out where to start." She thought about this. "Mrs. Patterson says when something's complicated, you should eat a snack first. I had half a graham cracker." "That's a start," Lily said, and looked out the window with an air of having made a reasonable point. That night, after she was in bed, 2 books, the Dragon series, the one where the dragon accidentally set a birthday cake on fire. Adrian sat at his desk behind the folding divider and opened the remote access to the system Evelyn's IT team had set up for him that afternoon. He'd been in there for 45 minutes before the first real finding surfaced, and when it did, he sat back and stared at it for a long time. It wasn't the Southeastern Hospital patch, though that was gone as he'd noted. It wasn't the cascade failure pattern, though the pattern was consistent with deliberate manipulation. It was something else, something he found in the changelog records from 14 months ago, buried in a routine maintenance update, invisible unless you knew exactly what you were looking for. Someone had gone into the core authentication layer of the coherence architecture and added a secondary access credential, a backdoor, built with enough technical precision that it didn't show up in any of the standard security audits. A backdoor that had been created 4 days before Adrian had been called into Calloway's office and handed a cardboard box. He sat with that for a long time. The system he'd built to protect people, hospitals, banks, emergency services, millions of lives running on invisible infrastructure, had been quietly turned into something else. A weapon was too dramatic a word for it, maybe. A lever. Something that could be used to create exactly the kind of cascading instability they were now experiencing. Exactly calibrated, exactly timed. He made a note. He documented what he'd found, where he'd found it, time-stamped everything, saved 3 separate copies to 3 separate locations, one of which was offline on an external drive. He immediately removed from the computer and put in his jacket pocket. He thought about Evelyn Cross and what she'd said. The pattern doesn't make sense. She'd been right. She'd looked at a problem from the outside, without full technical knowledge, and she'd still seen the shape of it correctly. That was its own kind of impressive. He sat in the quiet of his living room, the city making its nighttime sounds outside, the folding divider casting a shadow across the carpet, and he thought about the fact that someone had built a backdoor into his system the week before they fired him, which meant they'd known, even then, that they might need to use it someday, which meant this had never been only about credit or patents or the particular cruelty of having something you built taken from you and renamed. It was larger than that. It was a piece of infrastructure, long-term, calculated. The kind of plan that required patience and certainty that no one would ever come looking. They hadn't counted on Evelyn Cross, and they hadn't counted on the fact that Adrian kept originals of everything. He closed the laptop. He'd been at it for 3 hours. His coffee had gone cold at some point without him noticing. He drank it anyway, cold, standing up because his back had started to ache from hunching. He checked on Lily. She was asleep with one arm thrown over the edge of the mattress and her dragon book wedged under her pillow, which was a new development. He tucked the arm back under the covers. She made a small sound but didn't wake up. He went back to his desk. There was more to find. He was certain of that now. He made a fresh cup of coffee and opened the laptop again, and the blue-white light of the screen filled the small space behind the folding divider as the city went quiet around him, and he went to work. He was at Vantech every day that week, arriving at 8 after dropping Lily at daycare, leaving at 2:45 to make the pickup by 3. The engineers learned quickly that he was not the kind of person who explained himself at length or invited collaboration during diagnostic work. Preston seemed to respect this, or at least to understand it. On the second day, he quietly redirected the others when they started clustering around Adrian's workstation. He needs to concentrate, Preston said, which was accurate enough. Evelyn ran the company around him. He understood this peripherally. There were board calls, investor briefings, the ongoing management of a company in public crisis. But she didn't pull him into it, and she was precise about not wasting his time with things that weren't his problem. She appeared in his workspace once a day, usually in the late morning, and asked 1 or 2 direct questions. He gave direct answers. It was efficient in a way that he found, quietly, refreshing. On the 4th day, she appeared at 11:15 and sat beside him and said, without preamble, "Tell me what you've found. All of it." He turned to face her. "It's not maintenance degradation," he said. "I've confirmed that across the full system. I have documented evidence of deliberate changes, 17 distinct modifications made after I left, all of which degrade the system's stability in targeted ways. 9 of them required root-level access." He paused. "I also found a backdoor, authentication layer. It was installed 4 days before I was terminated." Evelyn was very still. "Someone built a way to access and modify your core security architecture from outside the company," he said, "without triggering any of the standard audit flags. And they built it while they were still employed here, before they had any stated reason to do so." He let that sit for a moment. "That's not a crime of opportunity. That's something planned in advance." "Can you close it?" she asked. "Yes. But I want to wait." She looked at him. "If I close it now," he said, "whoever built it knows immediately that it's been found. They've been careful. If they get spooked, we lose the ability to track how it's being used." He watched her think about that. If we document the access pattern first, log the connections, trace the origin, we have evidence, real evidence, the kind that holds up. She was quiet for a moment. How long? Another 48 hours to set the logging framework, then however long it takes for them to use it. And the immediate system risk? I can isolate the southeastern hospital cluster from the backdoor access today. That's the most critical vulnerability. The other failures I can stabilize within the same 48-hour window. He paused. I can keep people safe and still catch whoever is doing this, but I need you to trust me on the timeline. She looked at him for a long moment. Not the look of someone deciding whether to believe him. She'd already decided that, he thought. The look of someone calculating downstream consequences, running the board meeting in her head, the investor call, the press inquiry. All right, she said. 48 hours. I need one more thing, he said. I need the complete records of every maintenance action taken on this system since I left. Not the official logs, those have been edited. The raw server records, they're kept on a separate backup system. IT should have access. I'll have them sent to you within the hour. He nodded. She started to go, then stopped. Adrian, she said. It was the first time she'd used his first name. When you found the back door, the timing of it, 4 days before you were let go, what did you think when you realized that? He considered the question. He'd thought a lot of things, some of them not very useful, some of them just the particular anger of understanding exactly how long something had been being done to you. What he'd finally settled on, in the quiet of his apartment at 2 a.m, was something simpler. I thought, he said, that I was right not to leave quietly. Evelyn Cross held his gaze for a moment. Something moved through her expression. Not quite approval, not quite relief. Something more like recognition. No, she said. You were right. She left. He turned back to the screen, rolled his shoulders, and got back to work. The 48 hours passed the way intense work always passed for Adrian. Not slowly, not quickly, but in a kind of compressed tunnel where the outside world narrowed to whatever was directly in front of him. He set the logging framework on Wednesday night, working from the isolated workstation, building a silent trap around the back door, rather than closing it. The elegance of it was something he allowed himself to appreciate for about 30 seconds before moving on. A monitoring layer that sat invisible inside the authentication architecture, recording every access attempt, every credential use, every command executed through the unauthorized channel, all of it time-stamped and encrypted and being copied in real time to a secure server that only he and Evelyn had credentials for. Then he turned his attention to the system itself. The full picture, assembled over those 48 hours from the raw server records Evelyn's IT team had sent him, was worse than he'd initially estimated. Not catastrophically worse. The immediate crisis was containable, and he'd already stabilized the southeastern hospital cluster on day one, isolating it from the backdoor access point without closing the backdoor itself. But the cumulative damage across 3 years of what the official logs called routine maintenance was substantial. It wasn't just the 17 deliberate modifications he'd documented. There were hundreds of smaller changes, minor alterations that individually looked like nothing, like the kind of trivial updates any large system accumulated over time, but that in aggregate had been pulling the coherence architecture away from its original design logic in a specific direction, away from resilience, toward dependence. His system, as he'd built it, was designed to fail gracefully, to detect instability in any component and route around it, isolate the problem, maintain function in the rest of the network while the damaged piece was addressed. What 3 years of selective maintenance had done was quietly dismantle that redundancy. Not all of it. Enough of it that a sufficiently targeted disruption to the right components would no longer get routed around. It would cascade. Someone had spent 3 years turning a safety net into a tripwire. He documented all of it. Every change, every modification, cross-referenced with the personnel records of who had admin access during each timeframe, mapped against the access logs that showed very clearly that several of the most significant changes had been executed at 2 and 3 in the morning on weekdays when the building's security system showed minimal occupancy. He printed none of it. He kept it digital, encrypted, backed up in 4 separate locations. He had learned things about the value of paper trails in the years since Callaway had taken his name off every patent he'd filed. And one of those things was that paper could be taken from a person in ways that encrypted files on a server in a data center in another state could not. On Thursday afternoon, 31 hours into the logging framework, the back door was accessed. He was at his workstation when the alert came through, a small green indicator he'd set up in the corner of his monitoring dashboard, almost gentle in its appearance given what it meant. He sat forward. His coffee cup was on the desk, and he put it down without looking at it and focused entirely on the screen. The access was brief. 18 minutes. Whoever was on the other end knew what they were doing. They came in through the backdoor credential, navigated directly to two specific components of the network architecture, made adjustments to both, and left. No exploration, no wandering. Surgical. The adjustments they made were to the load balancing protocols for the city's financial clearinghouse network. Small changes, the kind that would look like a data management update in any surface audit. But Adrian had rebuilt this system from the inside out over the past week, and he knew exactly what those changes were doing. They were widening an existing vulnerability that he'd been in the process of repairing, essentially undoing 4 days of his work in 18 minutes. He sat back. They were watching. Whoever this was, they had enough visibility into what he was doing to know which repairs to target. Either they had another monitoring channel he hadn't found yet, or they had a source inside the building. He sat with that for a minute, breathing. Then he picked up his phone and called Evelyn. She answered on the second ring. "Tell me." "The back door was accessed an hour ago," he said. "I have the full log. 18-minute session, 2 targeted modifications to the clearinghouse load balancing protocols. They specifically targeted work I'd completed this week." A beat of silence. "They know you're here. They know someone's been repairing the system. They may or may not know it's me specifically." He paused. "But the precision of what they reversed tells me they're either monitoring our internal communications or they have someone feeding them information." Another pause, longer. "Who knows the full scope of what you've been working on?" "You." "Preston, broadly. He knows I'm doing a full assessment. The rest of the engineering team knows I'm here, but not the specifics." He thought about it. "And whoever has access to your executive communications." "I've been keeping board updates vague," she said, deliberately. "I've been describing the situation as a complex maintenance remediation. Who on the board has the technical background to know that's not the full story?" He heard her exhale slowly. 2 people. Martin Reeves and Carol Stroud. Reeves was on the original technology committee when the coherence architecture was first approved. He would understand the significance of what we're dealing with. And his relationship with Callaway? The pause before her answer told him everything before she said it. They've been close for a long time. Reeves was one of the board members who supported Callaway's promotion to CTO. Adrian looked at his screen. The log file from the backdoor access was still open in front of him, 18 minutes of activity recorded down to the millisecond. "I need 2 more days," he said. "I ship I can have the system fully stabilized and the backdoor closed within 48 hours. But I want to set 1 more trap first." "What kind of trap?" "I'm going to send a targeted internal update through the executive communications channel, something that looks like a routine status report, but contains a specific piece of false information, a repair I'm claiming to have completed that I haven't actually completed. If that specific information shows up in the next backdoor access, we know the leak is coming from your executive communications, and we'll know who has access to it." Evelyn was quiet for a moment. "And if it doesn't show up?" "Then the source is something else, and I keep looking." He paused. "But I think it'll show up." "All right," she said. "Draft the update. Send it to me and I'll route it through the executive channel. And Adrian, yeah. Be careful about what you say in this building. Not just to me. To anyone." "I know," he said. After he hung up, he sat for a moment looking at nothing, processing the shape of it. Then he thought about Lily, who had been dropped at daycare 2 hours ago and was probably currently either napping or conducting some kind of small-scale political dispute over playground equipment. And he felt something simple and solid settle in him. The thing he'd come to recognize over the past year is the feeling of knowing what mattered and where he needed to be at 3 o'clock. He turned back to the screen and started writing the false status report. The result came in faster than he'd expected. The trap update went through the executive channel at 4:15 Thursday afternoon. By 9:45 Thursday night, sitting at his desk at home behind the folding divider with Lily asleep in the next room, Adrian watched the backdoor access indicator light up green again. 22 minutes this time. And the first thing they navigated to was the component he'd claimed in the false report to have already repaired. They were looking for the work he'd supposedly done, checking whether the repair he'd described was actually in place. When they found it wasn't because he'd invented it, they moved on to other targets, made 2 more adjustments, and left. He had what he needed. He encrypted the full access log, added it to the documentation package he'd been building, and sent a single message to Evelyn. "It's the executive channel. Full confirmation. Talk tomorrow." Her reply came 4 minutes later at 9:57 at night, which told him something about her schedule. Understood. 8 a.m. He closed his laptop. He sat in the quiet for a minute. The city was doing its late-night thing outside. Distant traffic, a siren moving away somewhere on the north side. He could hear Lily breathing through the baby monitor he still kept on his desk out of habit, even though she was 5 and had told him several times that she was too old for a baby monitor, and he was allowed to just check on her normally like a regular dad. He wasn't ready to give it up. He wasn't sure when he would be. He checked on her, still asleep, one arm over the edge of the mattress as usual, the dragon book now under her pillow, and also apparently under her arm, tucked in like a companion. He stood in the doorway for a moment. The nightlight cast a warm yellow circle on the wall beside her bed. He went back to his desk and spent 2 more hours rebuilding the clearinghouse load balancing protocols that the backdoor access had undone. He fixed it better this time, with a secondary hardening layer he hadn't had in place before. Let them try to undo that. The board meeting was Evelyn's idea, and it was scheduled for a Friday, 6 days after Adrian had first walked back into Vantek's building. He hadn't asked to be part of it. She'd asked him, and he'd agreed, and then spent the following day preparing documentation in a way that reminded him of nothing so much as his final year of graduate study, the particular focused misery of assembling a thesis defense, except that this thesis was about the systematic theft of 3 years of his life and the ongoing sabotage of critical public infrastructure, so the stakes were somewhat higher than an academic committee. He printed everything this time. 3 sets, spiral-bound, organized chronologically, and cross-referenced with a technical appendix that explained in plain language what each piece of evidence demonstrated. He'd had them printed at a copy shop 3 blocks from his apartment because he didn't trust the Vantek printers. Lily had been watching him prep the night before. She was supposed to be in bed, but had gotten up twice for water, once for a reason she described as, "I forgot something," and then couldn't remember what it was, and a final time simply to stand in the living room and observe him for a few minutes. "You have a lot of papers," she said. "I do." "Is that for work?" "Yeah." She looked at the stacks on the coffee table. "Are you nervous?" He looked at her. She'd asked it the way kids ask things, directly, without the social filter that makes adults avoid the question. "A little," he said, which was true. "Not in a bad way. More like how you feel before something important." She considered this. "Like before my birthday?" "Something like that." She seemed satisfied with that. "I think you'll do good," she said, and went back to bed. He sat with that for a moment, the particular unexpected weight of being told something simple and sincere. Then he went back to organizing his documentation. The boardroom at Vantek was on the 15th floor, all glass on the north side with a view of the lake that was genuinely impressive and that Adrian did not look at once because he was thinking about other things. There were 9 board members. 5 were present in person, 4 on video screens mounted along the south wall. Evelyn was at the head of the table. Her posture was the same as it always was, completely upright, the kind of stillness that read as authority rather than restraint. Martin Reeves was third from the left, 60, silver-haired, the kind of careful blandness that took money and practice to maintain. He looked at Adrian when he came in and then looked at his phone, which Adrian noted. Evelyn introduced him briefly. Adrian Hale is the original architect of the coherent security system. He's been working as an independent consultant for the past week to address the network failures. I've asked him to present his findings to the board. "Oh, we were told this was a status update," one of the video screens said. A woman, 50s. The edge in her voice suggesting she didn't appreciate surprises. "It is a status update," Evelyn said. "Adrian." He stood up. He'd done exactly 1 public presentation in his professional life that he'd felt good about afterward, and it had been to a room of 12 engineers who all spoke the same technical language. This room was different. He reminded himself that he wasn't trying to impress anyone. He was trying to put documented facts in front of people who could act on them, and that was a thing he knew how to do. "I'll start with the current system status," he said, and then move to what the diagnostic work revealed about how we got here. He walked them through it methodically. System architecture overview, current failure points, the stabilization work he'd completed. He kept the technical language accessible without being condescending, a balance he'd spent some of the previous evening consciously calibrating. He watched their faces as he went. Some of them were tracking well. A few were clearly more lost than they wanted to appear. Reeves was very still. "The network is now stable," Adrian said, for the first time in approximately 6 weeks. "The immediate risk to the hospital systems and the clearinghouse has been addressed." A pause. "Now I want to talk about how the instability developed." He distributed the documentation packages. He waited while people opened them and found the first page, which showed a timeline. "What you're looking at," he said, "is a chronological record of every significant modification made to the coherence architecture between my departure from Vantech and the present. On the left column, you'll see the official maintenance log description. On the right column, you'll see what the raw server records, the system-level records, which are separate from the human-edited maintenance logs, show actually occurred." He gave them 30 seconds to look at it. "The discrepancies," he said, begin on day 16 after my departure and continue across a 3-year period. In total, I have documented 17 significant modifications that are either absent from the official maintenance logs entirely or are described in ways that misrepresent what was actually changed. Cross-referencing the timestamps of these modifications with personnel access records shows that 12 of them were executed during off-hours by credentials assigned to 2 individuals, both of whom held root-level access during that period. "This is a serious allegation," said the woman on the video screen. Her name was Paulson, he'd been told. Legal background. "I understand that," Adrian said. "I've tried to be precise about what the evidence shows and what it doesn't. What it shows is a documented pattern of unauthorized modification. What requires further investigation is intent and direction." He paused. "What I can tell you with certainty is the outcome. Someone spent 3 years systematically dismantling the redundancy built into this system. The result is what we experienced over the past 6 weeks." "You said unauthorized," Reeves said. First time he'd spoken, his voice was measured. "The individuals with admin access were authorized to perform system maintenance." "They were authorized to perform maintenance," Adrian said. "They were not authorized to install a covert authentication backdoor in the core security layer." He turned to the next section in the documentation package. Page 7. "I found this during the initial diagnostic assessment. It's a secondary access credential embedded in the authentication architecture installed at a specific timestamp." He let them find the page. "That timestamp is 4 days before I was terminated." The room was quiet. He continued. "This credential provides external access to the core system without triggering any standard security audit flag. I've included in the appendix a technical explanation of how it works and how it was concealed. I've also included," he turned to the next tab, "a complete log of every time that backdoor has been accessed in the past week, including 2 sessions that occurred after I had begun repair work here, in which the modifications I had completed were specifically and precisely reversed." Reeves moved in his chair. It was small, barely perceptible, but Adrian was watching. "Those reversal sessions," Adrian said, "occurred within hours of internal status updates circulated through the executive communications channel. I tested this directly." He explained the false report, the timing of the subsequent backdoor access, the fact that the unauthorized user had navigated directly to the component he'd falsely described as repaired. "The conclusion I'm drawing from this is that someone with access to executive-level communications has been sharing that information with whoever holds the backdoor credential." The board member named Paulson said, "Are you suggesting a board member is involved?" "I'm presenting what the evidence shows," Adrian said. "I'm not making accusations beyond what's documented. What's documented is a pattern of information leak from the executive channel, correlating directly with unauthorized system access." Reeves stood up. "This is—" He stopped. He looked at Evelyn. Something crossed his face. Not quite the calculation of a man deciding what to say, but the prior stage, the moment before calculation, when you're still deciding whether to bother. Then he sat back down. Evelyn spoke for the first time since handing the floor to Adrian. Her voice was level and quiet and carried the entire room. "We've also recovered the original patent documentation filed by Adrian Hale prior to his termination." Page 12. She waited. "As you can see, the patents that are currently assigned to the company under Derek Calloway's name were filed originally under Adrian Hale's name. The subsequent filings," the ones that appear in our current IP registry, were made 4 months after Adrian's termination, using versions of the documentation from which his name and identifying information had been removed. A pause. Our legal team has confirmed that the original filings predate the amended versions by the relevant margins. The IP belongs, in documented origin, to Adrian Hale. The room was very quiet. Reeves said, "I'd like to take a short recess." "We're not taking a recess," Evelyn said. Same quiet voice. "We're going to finish the presentation, and then we're going to vote on 3 agenda items. The first is the formal restoration of all intellectual property rights to their documented original creator. The second is the authorization of a full forensic audit of the system modification records and the executive communications channel. The third is the immediate suspension of Martin Reeves from board activities pending the outcome of that audit." Reeves said, "Evelyn, you texted Derek Calloway 11 minutes before the second backdoor access session," Evelyn said. "I have the communications records." She had said this was coming. She'd told Adrian the morning of the meeting that she'd subpoenaed the records through the company's legal authority over board communications and found what she'd been looking for. She hadn't told him exactly when she planned to deploy it. He thought the timing was well chosen. "I'm not accusing you of criminal activity today, Martin. I'm saying there are questions that require answers before you continue exercising board authority." Reeves was silent. The board voted. Not unanimously. 2 members abstained and one of the video screens disconnected entirely without comment, but the majority held on all 3 items. Reeves left without speaking. The woman on the remaining video screens, Paulson, asked 3 precise legal questions that Evelyn answered with equal precision and then said, "I want the forensic audit firm engaged by Monday." "Agreed," Evelyn said. After the room cleared, Adrian was standing at the window. He'd finally looked at the lake, which was very blue and completely indifferent to everything that had just happened in the room behind him, when Evelyn came up beside him. "You did well," she said. "I just read facts off paper." "That's exactly what the moment needed," she said. "Facts off paper, delivered by the person who lived them." He turned to look at her. She looked tired, he thought. Not the bone tired of someone running out of fuel, more like the specific tired of someone who'd been carrying significant weight with careful posture for a long time and had just been able to set part of it down. "Reeves," he said, how long have you suspected him?" 3 weeks, she said, "since I started pulling the original documentation. He was on the technology committee when the coherent system was approved. He would have known the significance of what Calloway was presenting, known that the technical complexity made it unlikely Calloway had built it himself. Either he didn't ask questions, or he asked questions and was satisfied with the answers he received." She paused. "I think the former." "You think he knew from the beginning?" "I think he was willingly uninformed," she said, "which is, practically speaking, the same thing." Adrian looked back at the lake. "The audit's going to take time." "Yes, and Calloway will lawyer up." "Already has, I'd imagine." She didn't seem particularly troubled by this. Lawyers take time. Evidence is patient. He thought about that. Then, "The system is going to need work beyond what I've done this week. The 3-year modification pattern, undoing all of it properly, rebuilding the redundancy to spec. That's months of work." "I know," she said. "I'm not agreeing to anything right now," he said. "I want to be clear about that." "I'm not asking you to agree to anything right now," she said. "I'm noting that the work exists and that you're the person who understands it. What you do with that information is up to you." He looked at her. There was something in the way she'd said it. Not a manipulation, not even really a pitch, just an acknowledgement of reality, and then a deliberate step back from it, that he found, oddly, more persuasive than any argument she might have made. "I have a daughter to pick up at 3, he said. "I know you do." He checked his watch. 2:17. He had a window. He thought about the documentation package still in front of his seat at the board table. 3 spiral-bound sets containing 3 years of patient record-keeping, every version commit, every original patent filing, every timestamp that proved what he'd built and when and under whose name it had always belonged. He thought about the first time he'd realized the patents had been refiled, standing at his desk with a cup of coffee going cold in his hand, that particular sick feeling of seeing something you knew was wrong and not yet understanding the scale of it. He thought about the box with the chipped succulent pot. He thought about Lily saying, "I think you'll do good." "I need the official restoration in writing before I agree to anything further," he said. "My name on every patent, every system documentation, every technical record, not pending the audit, now, as an immediate board action." "It was Agenda Item 1, Evelyn said. "It passed." He turned to look at her. "The vote already happened," she said. There was something almost gentle in how she said it. "The paperwork is being prepared today." He stood with that for a moment. It should have felt bigger, he thought. It should have felt like something cracking open. Instead, it felt quiet, like a door closing on a room he'd been locked out of for a long time. Not dramatic, just final. "Okay," he said. He picked up his laptop bag. Evelyn was looking at the lake now, hands in her lap, the afternoon light coming through the glass at a low angle. "Go get your daughter," she said. He walked out of the boardroom and down the hall to the elevator, pressed the button, waited. The elevator opened. He rode down 15 floors to the lobby, walked through the revolving door, and stepped out into the afternoon. The lake wind was cold and smelled like early spring. His car was in the parking structure across the street. He had 19 minutes to get to daycare. He walked. Lily had opinions about the tricycle situation that had apparently not been resolved to her satisfaction, because she brought it up again on the drive home from daycare. "Marcus said sorry," she reported, "but I don't think he meant it." "What made you think he didn't mean it?" "He was looking at the tricycle when he said it. Not at me." Adrian glanced at her in the rearview mirror. "That's actually a pretty good observation." She considered this. "Mrs. Patterson said an apology counts even if you're not looking, but I don't know." "What do you think?" Lily was quiet for a moment, watching the street go by. "I think it counts more if you look at the person." "I think you're right," he said. She nodded, satisfied, and went back to watching out the window. Adrian drove and didn't say anything about the board meeting, about Reeves walking out, about the vote that had passed and the paperwork being prepared today. He didn't say anything about any of it. He just drove and listened to Lily explain the additional injustice of Marcus also having taken the best parking spot for the tricycle near the fence, which apparently was a coveted location for reasons involving shade and proximity to the water fountain. By the time they got home, he felt something in his chest that was not happiness exactly, but was close to it. Not relief either. More like the sensation of a noise stopping. A low, constant sound you'd stopped consciously hearing a long time ago, finally gone, and the quiet it left behind having its own texture. He made grilled cheese for dinner because Lily asked for it, and he didn't have the energy to argue for a vegetable, and they ate at the kitchen table, and she told him more about Marcus and the tricycle, and he listened to all of it. The lawsuit arrived on a Tuesday, 3 weeks after the board meeting. Adrian was at Vantech when Evelyn's attorney called her. He was in the engineering workspace, his workspace now, a larger room they'd moved him into once the scope of the rebuilding work became clear, when she appeared in the doorway, phone in hand, with an expression he'd come to recognize as her controlled version of something that was probably frustration. "Callaway's filed," she said. He leaned back in his chair. He'd expected it. He told himself he'd expected it. He still felt a particular dull thud in his chest hearing it said out loud. "On what grounds?" "Breach of contract, defamation, and wrongful appropriation of intellectual property." She said the last one without any particular emphasis, but it landed with weight anyway. "He's claiming the work I restored to your name was legitimately his, that the evidence presented to the board was fabricated, and that my actions in presenting it constitute a campaign of deliberate reputational harm." Adrian was quiet for a moment. "He's going to claim I fabricated the version control records." His filing characterizes them as selectively presented technical data compiled by a disgruntled former employee. She said it with the same flat tone. "That's actually a pretty good line," Adrian said. Evelyn looked at him. "It is," she said, which surprised him slightly. "He has a good attorney. This is going to be unpleasant." "How unpleasant?" "Months, possibly longer." She came into the room and sat down in the chair across from his workstation. She did this sometimes, just appeared and sat, which he'd come to understand was how she processed things that required thinking rather than just deciding. His attorney will request full discovery, every document, every record, every communication. They'll look for anything they can use to complicate the evidentiary picture. The version control records are immutable, Adrian said. Git history doesn't lie. The timestamps on the original patent filings are federal records. You can't fabricate a federal filing date retroactively. No, she agreed, but you can spend 18 months making the process expensive and exhausting enough that the other side loses the will to continue. That's the play here, I think. He doesn't expect to win on the merits. Adrian looked at the monitors on his desk. 4 of them now. He'd requisitioned a 4th because the scope of the rebuild work required it, and because Evelyn had told him to take whatever he needed, and he decided to take that at face value. The screen showed the current health state of the coherence architecture, mostly green with isolated amber patches where the rebuilding work was still in progress, improving every day. I'm not going to stop, he said. I know that. I want you to know that explicitly. Whatever he files, whatever the process looks like, I'm going to see this through. He doesn't get to outlast me. Evelyn looked at him steadily. I know, she said again. I'm not worried about you. I'm managing the board's nerve. Is that an issue? 2 members are concerned about the reputational exposure from an extended legal dispute. They'd prefer a settlement. She said it without judgment, just information. I've told them we're not settling. Is that your call to make? It's my call to make, she said, with a quiet certainty that didn't invite further discussion. Settling means accepting a version of events that isn't true. I don't do that. He looked at her for a moment. Has anyone told you that you're stubborn? Frequently, she said, and usually by people who are losing an argument. She moved her chair slightly, a small adjustment. My attorney will need to sit with you this week. Prepare your documentation package for the discovery process. Fine. He turned back to his screen, so I'll make time. Morning is better. I need afternoons for the rebuild. I'll tell her. She stayed for another minute, not saying anything. Adrian worked. He'd gotten used to her presence in the room this way. She didn't require conversation to fill silence, which was a quality he'd found increasingly rare and valuable in the people he spent time around. The forensic audit firm submitted their preliminary report this morning, she said eventually. He looked over at her. They've confirmed the backdoor installation and the modification pattern, she said. They've also traced the credential used to access the backdoor to a private server registered to a shell company. The shell company's registered agent is a former executive assistant who worked for Callaway. A pause. The FBI has been notified. It's out of our hands at that point, in terms of the criminal side of things. And Reeves? The audit found 18 communications between Reeves and the shell company's email domain over the past 2 years. His attorney is claiming he didn't know the nature of what he was forwarding. She said this in the particular tone of someone describing an explanation they found technically possible and personally implausible. Do you believe that? I believe that Martin Reeves is a 60-year-old man who has spent his career in positions where he could avoid knowing things that were inconvenient to know, she said. Whether a jury believes it is a different question. Adrian exhaled. This is going to be a circus. It is, she agreed. Are you okay? He looked at her. She asked the question the way she asked most things, directly, without softening, but without hardness either. Just a genuine inquiry, offered without the expectation of any particular answer. I've been better, he said honestly. But yeah, I'm okay. She nodded. She left. He went back to work. The weeks after the lawsuit filing had a strange double quality to them, frenetic in terms of legal activity, and also somehow steady in the way that Adrian's days had developed a shape he hadn't expected when he'd first walked back into Vantech. He came in at 8. He picked up Lily at 3. In between, he rebuilt. The coherence architecture, his architecture, was responding to the work the way something responds when it recognizes what it's supposed to be. That was an irrational way to think about software, and he knew it, but there was a quality to the debugging process that felt like removing obstructions rather than making repairs. Like he was clearing away 3 years of someone else's interference and letting the underlying design logic reassert itself. Preston had stopped being awkward around him sometime in the second week. Now, he hovered at the edge of useful. Not quite capable of contributing to the core rebuild work, but good at managing the peripheral tasks, coordinating with the infrastructure team, handling the vendor communications that Adrian had no patience for. Adrian had begun explaining things to him unprompted, not because he needed to, but because Preston asked good questions and actually listened to the answers, which was not as common as it should be. Can I ask you something? Preston said one afternoon, appearing at the edge of Adrian's workstation with a coffee he'd brought from the kitchen down the hall. He did this occasionally. The coffee was always slightly too strong because Preston made it too strong, but Adrian drank it anyway. Yeah. When you built this originally, did you know how good it was? Like, did you know at the time? Adrian thought about it. I knew it was right, he said. I knew it would do what I designed it to do. Whether that qualified as good, I don't think I thought about it in those terms. You weren't proud of it? I was satisfied when it worked. That's different from proud. He paused. Proud felt premature, like it still had to actually go out and do the job. Being proud of something before it does the job is... He looked for the word. Tempting fate? Preston offered. Presumptuous, Adrian said. But fate works too. Preston drank his coffee. I've been in this field 11 years, he said. I've never seen anything built like this. The adaptive layer alone... He shook his head. Whoever taught you, they did something right. I taught myself, Adrian said. Preston blinked. All of it? I had professors. They gave me vocabulary for things I already half understood. He shrugged. Most of it I figured out by taking things apart and seeing how they worked, and by having a real problem to solve, having something that actually mattered to get right. Preston nodded slowly. The hospital systems. Yeah. He thought about it. The early days of understanding what Vantech's infrastructure actually connected to, the weight of that understanding, the specific change in how you approach a problem when a failure means people die. When you know what you're protecting, the work has a different texture. You're not just solving a puzzle, you're accountable for the answer. Preston was quiet for a moment. I wish someone had explained it to me that way when I started, he said. Adrian picked up his coffee. I'm telling you now. The attorney's name was Diana Foss, and she was sharper than she looked, which Adrian suspected she'd cultivated deliberately. She looked like someone's aunt, warm-faced, mid-50s, comfortable shoes, and operated like a forensic accountant. She sat across from him in a small conference room on the third floor for 3 separate sessions over 2 weeks, going through every piece of documentation he'd compiled with a precision that he found, after his initial resistance to the process, genuinely reassuring. He's going to challenge the Git history, she told him in the second session. His technical expert, and he's hired one, is going to argue that version control records can be manipulated retroactively under specific conditions. They can be, Adrian said, under very specific conditions that leave traces. Anyone who actually knows what they're looking at can tell the difference between a genuine history and a manufactured one. Can you demonstrate that? Yes. Can you demonstrate it in a way that a judge with no technical background can understand? He thought about how he'd explain things to Preston, finding the right analogy, the right frame. He thought about explaining things to Lily, which had turned out to be the most demanding communication challenge of his life, and had, unexpectedly, made him better at explaining things to everyone else. Yes, he said. I can do that. Diana made a note. The patent filing dates are our strongest ground, she said. Federal records. Time-stamped by the Patent Office. Impossible to retroactively alter without detection. She looked at her papers. What I want to understand is the chain of custody for the original documentation. Between when you first filed and when you discovered the refiling, where were the original records? 3 places, he said. My personal email. I emailed myself copies of all draft filings as a habit, which creates independent timestamps through the mail server. My personal external drive, which I've had in my possession continuously, and the Patent Office's own digital records, which show both the original filing and the subsequent amended filing as separate entries. Diana looked at him over her reading glasses. You emailed yourself copies. I email myself everything important. It's a habit. Well, that's why we're going to win, she said, matter-of-factly, and went back to her notes. He wasn't sure he'd win. He was sure he wasn't going to stop trying. Monk. Evelyn had been working 12-hour days since before Adrian arrived at Vantech, and she showed no signs of adjusting this despite what she was managing. He knew this not because she complained about it. She did not complain about anything he'd ever observed, but because of the timestamps on her emails, which arrived at 6 in the morning and 10 at night with equal regularity. He mentioned it once, indirectly. Do you actually stop working at any point? They were in her office. A corner room on the 7th floor that she'd arranged practically. Minimal decoration, 2 monitors, and a whiteboard covered in notes she wrote in very small, precise handwriting. It was late afternoon. The light through the windows was going orange. "I sleep," she said, not looking up from what she was reading. "I eat. I exercise." She did look up then. "I'm not a martyr. I just have a lot to manage right now." "I know. Ma." He'd come in to show her the latest rebuild progress report. He set it on her desk. "The Eastern Grid is fully restored. We're at 93% system integrity across all monitored infrastructure." She looked at the report. "When do we hit full integrity?" 3 weeks, assuming no new interference, which, now that the back door is closed and the FBI is involved, is a fairly safe assumption. She nodded. She flipped through the pages with the speed of someone who read the way other people breathe, automatically and constantly. "There's something I want to discuss with you," she said, setting the report down. "And I want to be clear up front that there's no pressure in either direction. This is a conversation, not a negotiation." He sat down across from her desk. "The company needs a chief security architect," she said, "permanently. Someone who understands the infrastructure at a level that goes beyond department management. Someone who can maintain the coherent system the way it was designed to be maintained, and who has the institutional authority to protect it from the kind of interference it's experienced." She looked at him levelly. "That person is you, and I'm aware that I've put you through enough in the past month that asking you to formally join this company may be a significant request." Adrian was quiet for a moment. What would the role actually look like, day to day? Architecture oversight, security strategy at the executive level. You'd have final authority over any modification to core infrastructure. Nothing gets changed without your sign-off. You'd report directly to me. She paused. "And your schedule accommodates your daughter's daycare. That's not negotiable from my side either. It would be written into the employment terms." "Salary." She named a number. He kept his expression neutral, but it was substantially above what he'd been making before, and meaningfully above what he'd mentally ballparked. She'd done her research, clearly. "I need to think about it," he said. "Of course." "Not because I'm uncertain about the work," he said, because he felt that was important to clarify. "The work I want to do. I need to think about what it means to formally be here, in this building, long term." She nodded. She understood what he meant, he thought. The building meant something that wasn't entirely comfortable. The building was where Calloway had handed him a box with a chipped, succulent pot and told him it wasn't personal. "Take whatever time you need," she said. He stood to go. At the door, he stopped. "Can I ask you something?" "Yes." "The board. The 2 members who wanted to settle. How much pressure is that for you?" She considered the question with the seriousness she gave most things. "Some," she said. "They're not wrong that a prolonged legal dispute is costly and destabilizing. Their concern is legitimate. I just disagree with their conclusion about what to do with the concern." "Does it bother you, having people second-guess the call?" "It would bother me more if they didn't," she said. "People who never get second-guessed are usually people who've arranged things so that second-guessing them has consequences. I don't want to be that kind of leader." She paused. "It bothers me in the moment. I think it's right in the larger picture. Both of those things are true simultaneously." He looked at her for a moment. "You're good at this," he said. "At the leadership thing. I don't say that because it's something to say." She met his gaze, and something moved briefly across her face. Not quite surprise, but the slight adjustment of someone receiving something they hadn't expected. "Thank you," she said simply. He left. Lily met Evelyn on a Thursday afternoon in the 6th week, which happened because Adrian had a late coordination call with the forensic audit firm that ran long, and Evelyn had said, "Don't worry about it, bring her up. We have a couch and coloring books from a board member's grandchildren that have been sitting in my office for 3 months, and I've been looking for someone to actually use them." He'd picked Lily up at 3 and brought her back to Vantech and installed her on the couch in Evelyn's office with a set of colored pencils and a coloring book while he finished the call in the adjacent conference room. He was back in 20 minutes. What he found when he returned was Lily on the couch, coloring with great focus, and Evelyn at her desk but turned sideways, apparently having a conversation with Lily about the coloring book. "Because the dragon's supposed to be green," Lily was explaining. "But I made him purple because I think he would want to be purple." "How do you know what he'd want?" Evelyn asked. genuine curiosity in her voice, not the performance of it. Because green is boring for a dragon, Lily said, with the confidence of someone making an obvious point to a slow student. Every dragon is green. If I were a dragon, I'd want to be something interesting. What color would you be? Lily thought about it. Purple and orange, she said, but the orange would just be on my wings. That sounds very specific. I've thought about it, Lily said. Adrian stood in the doorway. Neither of them had noticed him yet. He stayed where he was for a moment. My chair is purple, Evelyn said. Lily looked at the wheelchair. The frame was, in fact, a deep eggplant color, which Adrian had noticed and filed away without comment weeks ago. I chose that color for the same reason you'd choose it for the dragon. Lily considered this seriously. Because green is boring? Because I wanted something interesting, Evelyn said, and because it's mine, so I get to decide what color it is. Lily nodded. This was apparently a satisfactory philosophy. She went back to coloring. Adrian came in. Sorry, that ran long. It was fine, Evelyn said. She looked at Lily, still focused on the dragon. She's been excellent company. She has opinions, he said. Good opinions, Evelyn said. Lily looked up. Daddy, did you know her chair is purple on purpose? I did know that. That's good, Lily said, like she approved of him having that information. On the drive home, Lily was quiet for a few blocks, which usually meant she was processing something. Is she your friend? Lily asked. She's my boss, he said. But is she your friend? He thought about it. We're getting there, he said. Lily nodded. I think she's nice, she said. She talked to me like I was a real person. You are a real person. Some adults talk to me like I'm a small animal, Lily said. She didn't do that. He glanced at her in the rearview mirror. She had purple pencil on her right hand from coloring and hadn't noticed. I'll pass that along, he said. You don't have to, Lily said. I'll tell her myself next time. He didn't say anything about that. He filed it away. The lawsuit, at month 3, entered the discovery phase, which Diana had described accurately as unpleasant in the way that a long and expensive and fundamentally stupid process is unpleasant. Callaway's legal team submitted requests for 14 categories of documentation and called for depositions from 7 Vantech employees, including Adrian. The deposition was on a Wednesday morning. Diana had prepared him thoroughly. She had a gift for anticipating the direction of hostile questioning and drilling him on staying factual and concise, not over-explaining, not getting pulled into arguing on terrain that wasn't relevant. He sat across a conference table from Callaway's attorney, a man named Gerald Park, who was good at his job in the technical sense of building traps from innocuous-seeming questions, and spent 3 hours answering questions about every piece of documentation he'd compiled, every decision he'd made, every conversation he could or couldn't specifically remember. Callaway himself was not in the room. That had surprised Adrian initially. He'd expected to be in the same room as the man, had braced for it, but Callaway's team had apparently decided his presence was unnecessary for this stage. Near the end, Park asked, Mr. Hale, would you describe yourself as someone who holds grudges? Diana said, Objection, calls for self-characterization. I'll allow the witness to answer if he chooses, said the court reporter monitor presence. This was a hybrid proceeding. I don't think so, Adrian said. I think I have a fairly accurate memory of what happened to me. Whether that's a grudge or just information depends on your perspective. And you believe your memory of events is accurate. I have time-stamped documentation supporting my memory of events, Adrian said. So yes, Park moved on. After, in the elevator down from the law firm's offices, Diana said, the documentation answer. That was good. But I've been thinking about how to say that for 3 months, he admitted. She smiled. Save the good lines. He went straight from the deposition to Vantech. He had 4 hours before pickup. He sat down at his workstation and looked at the screens. System integrity at 96%. The Eastern grid he'd finished last week was running cleanly. The Northern Hospital cluster, the one he'd been most worried about, had been stable for 18 days. The work was almost done. Not the legal work. Not the larger institutional reckoning that was going to play out however it played out, over however many months. But his work, the work he'd come back to do, the system he'd been brought back to save and had instead rebuilt from the inside out, that was almost done. He sat with that for a minute. Then Preston appeared in the doorway. You have a minute? Yeah. Preston came in and sat down. He had the slightly uncomfortable posture of someone who has decided to say something and is now committed to it. I wanted to say, I know this has been a rough stretch, the deposition and the legal stuff. I just wanted to say I think what you're doing takes something, not backing down from it. Adrian looked at him. It's not courage, he said, because he'd thought about this. I'm not sure courage is the right word. It's more like, I know what happened, and I know what the record shows. Stopping would mean letting a false version of events become permanent, and I can't do that. That sounds like courage to me, Preston said. Maybe. Adrian turned back to his screens. Or maybe it's just that I'm very bad at leaving things unfinished. Preston laughed. A genuine one, surprised out of him. Yeah, he said. I've noticed that. He left. Adrian looked at the system status. 96% integrity. 3 weeks of work remaining, at his current rate. He picked up his coffee. He got back to work. And somewhere in the ordinary texture of that afternoon, the screens, the coffee, the city sounds outside, the clock moving toward 3, he realized he'd made his decision about the job. He hadn't decided it in any single moment. It had accumulated the way most real decisions do, out of the 100 small things that tell you where you actually are rather than where you thought you were going. He would take it, not because of what the company owed him, though it owed him. Not because of the money, though the money was real. Because the work was real and it mattered, and he was the person who understood it, and there was something clarifying about being in a place that had tried to erase you and standing there anyway, doing the work, because the work needed to be done and you were the one who could do it. He'd tell Evelyn tomorrow. He picked Lily up at 3. She'd had a better day with Marcus. Apparently he'd let her have the tricycle spot by the fence without being asked, which she described as progress, in a tone she'd definitely picked up from overhearing adult conversation. That's actually mature of him, Adrian said. I know, Lily said. I told him so. How did he take that? He looked confused, she said, but I think that's okay. He drove home. He made pasta. He read 2 books. A New Dragon installment, where the dragon burned down a small wooden bridge by accident and then spent the entire book helping the local villagers rebuild it, which Lily found deeply satisfying, and which Adrian thought was not bad as a parable. After she was asleep, he sat at his desk and looked at nothing for a while. He thought about Rachel, the way he often did at night in the quiet. Not painfully, exactly, not anymore. More like returning to a place that mattered, touching the fact of it, being honest about what it was. She would have had thoughts about all of this. She would have had specific thoughts about Evelyn, expressed with the combination of sharp observation and complete sincerity that had characterized most of her opinions. She would have found Lily's tricycle political analysis very funny. He sat with that. Then he opened his laptop and wrote a 3-sentence email to Diana with a question about the Discovery timeline, closed it, and went to bed. Tomorrow, he would tell Evelyn yes. Tonight there was just the quiet, and the city, and the baby monitor breathing on his desk, and that was enough. He told Evelyn yes the next morning, standing in her doorway at 8:15 with his laptop bag still on his shoulder because he'd decided on the walk from the elevator that he didn't want to make a whole thing of it. I'll take the position, he said. She looked up from her monitor. Okay, she said. That's it? Okay? I was waiting for you to get there, she said. I didn't think it would help to push. She turned back to her screen. I'll have HR send you the formal offer today. Review it. Come back with anything you want adjusted. He stood there for another second. You could act slightly more pleased. She looked at him again, and something in her expression shifted. Not a full smile. Evelyn didn't really do full smiles in the conventional sense, but a particular relaxing around her eyes that he'd come to understand was the equivalent. I'm very pleased, she said. I'm also in the middle of a board communication that has a 30-minute deadline. Can I be pleased later? Yeah, he said. Later works. He went to his workstation and got to work. What? The lawsuit resolution did not come in a single dramatic moment. That was the thing about real legal proceedings that nobody told you. They didn't end. They accumulated toward an ending. And then one day you were on the phone with Diana and she was using the word summary judgment, and you had to ask her to repeat it because you were simultaneously monitoring a system diagnostic and only half listening. Say that again, he said, setting down the diagnostic tablet. The judge has granted summary judgment on the intellectual property claims, Diana said. Her voice had the careful evenness of someone delivering good news to a person they know will not react extravagantly. Callaway's technical expert's testimony was found insufficient to create a genuine dispute of material fact regarding the patent filing dates. The federal record is unambiguous. The court is ruling in your favor on the core IP issue without proceeding to trial. Adrian sat down. He was in his office. He had an actual office now, small, cluttered with his 4 monitors and a whiteboard and the chipped succulent pot that he'd repotted into something bigger because it had started actually growing in the intervening year and needed more room. The defamation and breach of contract claims, he asked. The defamation claim was always weak. Truth is an absolute defense, and we have documentation supporting every statement made at the board meeting. His attorney knows that. I expect them to withdraw those claims within the week, rather than proceed to a trial they won't win. She paused. The breach of contract claim is more complicated and will likely require a separate proceeding, but without the IP claims as the foundation, it's structurally much weaker. His attorneys will be aware of this. So it's over, he said. The primary dispute is over, she said. There'll be cleanup. There's always cleanup. But the thing you came back to fight, yes, that's done. He sat with that for a moment. Adrian, Diana said, and it was unusual enough for her to use his first name unprompted that he paid attention. You had everything you needed from day one. The documentation, the records, the timestamps. You did the work to preserve all of it, years before anyone asked you to. That's why this worked. I was just careful, he said. Most people aren't, she said. Be proud of that. He thanked her and hung up. He sat in the office for a few minutes, not doing anything in particular. The succulent on the corner of his desk had put out 2 new growth points in the past month. He hadn't done anything to encourage this. It had just decided to grow. He got up, walked down the hall, and knocked on Evelyn's open door. She was on the phone. She held up one finger. Give me a minute, and finished the call. What happened? Summary judgment, he said. IP claims resolved in my favor. She looked at him for a moment. Then she said, Come in and close the door. He did. She was quiet for a few seconds, which was unusual for her when there were things to process. I want to say something, and I want you to actually hear it, she said. Not professionally, just as one person to another. He waited. What was done to you was wrong, she said. The theft, the termination, the 3 years of watching your work carry someone else's name, all of it. And I know that a court ruling doesn't undo any of that. It doesn't give you back the time. It doesn't erase what it cost you while you were carrying it. I just want to say that I know that, and I'm sorry it happened. He didn't say anything for a moment. He wasn't sure what to say. The apology was real. She wasn't performing it. She was just delivering it the way she delivered most things, directly and without embellishment, and that made it land differently than apologies usually did. Thank you, he said, which was not enough, but was what he had. She nodded. She picked up her phone, made a note to herself. She did this constantly. The phone was basically an external memory, and set it down. Now, what do you need from me to close out the legal cleanup? And just like that, they were back in it, which was also, he'd come to understand, its own form of respect. Not dwelling, moving forward. Commute. The criminal proceedings against Derek Callaway and Martin Reeves moved on the FBI's timeline, which was slow and thorough and entirely outside Adrian's control. He'd given his testimony to the federal investigators in a 4-hour session in January, methodical, document-heavy, the same evidence he'd presented to the board translated into the language of a federal inquiry, and then he'd stepped back from it because it was no longer his to manage. He heard things secondhand as the months went on. Reeves had negotiated a cooperation agreement providing testimony about Callaway's activities in exchange for reduced exposure on his own charges. Callaway's attorney had filed 3 separate motions that were all denied. The shell company had been traced back through 2 layers of incorporation to a financial account bearing Callaway's wife's maiden name, which Diana described as not exactly sophisticated and which told Adrian something about how certain Callaway had been that no one would ever look. That certainty was the thing Adrian kept coming back to. Not the theft itself. The theft was explicable in the ordinary way that human self-interest and opportunity created explicable bad behavior. It was the certainty, the absolute, unexamined conviction that Adrian would walk away and stay walked away. That the quiet man with the cardboard box would go home and stay home and accept the erasure of 3 years of his life because that was what people like him did. He thought about that sometimes when he was doing something ordinary, making coffee, driving to daycare. And what he felt about it was not anger anymore, mostly. More like the flat recognition of how wrong that calculation had been. Not because he was exceptional, because they'd mistaken quiet for absence. They'd seen a person who didn't argue, who didn't perform, who didn't fill rooms the way Calloway filled rooms, and they'd concluded there was nothing there to reckon with. There was something to reckon with. There always had been. Always had. He thought about Lily asking him that morning at the kitchen table a year and a half ago, with cereal going soggy in her bowl, "Are you sad?" And him saying, "A little," and her going back to her cartoons, matter of fact, accepting it as information rather than catastrophe, the way children accept hard things when the adult in their life doesn't fall apart about them. He'd held it together for her. He'd kept going for her. And in the end, that was the thing that had made everything else possible. Not strategy, not legal preparation, not documentation habits, just the necessity of getting up every morning and being functional because there was a small person who needed him to be. You couldn't plan for that kind of accidental resilience. It just happened, or it didn't. Lily turned 6 in April. She had decided several months earlier that she wanted a purple birthday cake, which she'd arrived at independently and which Adrian suspected had something to do with Evelyn's wheelchair frame, though he didn't ask because he thought the independence of the decision mattered to her. He made the cake himself, which was an adventure. He was not a baker. He had a methodical mind, and baking required a different kind of attention than systems architecture. More faith in process, less ability to course-correct mid-execution. The first attempt produced something that was structurally sound but cosmetically catastrophic. The purple frosting had gone on while the cake was still faintly warm and had developed a texture he could only describe as geological. Lily examined it seriously. "It looks like a mountain," she said. "It's supposed to be flat," he said. "Mountains are interesting, though," she said. He made a second one. This one was flat. The purple was the right shade. He felt disproportionately satisfied about this, which he mentioned to no one. He'd invited Evelyn. He'd done it in the way he did most things he was uncertain about. Directly, without preamble, accepting whatever the answer was. He'd knocked on her office door on a Tuesday afternoon and said, "Lily's birthday is the 14th. We're doing something small at the apartment. She'd like you to come if you can." Evelyn had looked at him for a moment. "I'd like that," she said. Straightforward, no performance of being touched. Just yes. Lily had reacted to this news with the measured enthusiasm of a child who had expected this outcome and was pleased to have her expectations confirmed. "I knew she'd come," she said. "How did you know?" "Because she's your friend now," Lily said. "You just don't say it yet." He did not respond to this. The party was small. His mother had come in from Cincinnati, which meant 2 days of her looking at the apartment with the particular expression of a woman who had decided not to say things about what she was looking at and was working very hard at not saying them. A couple of kids from Lily's daycare. Mrs. Patterson, who came off the clock and brought a card from the whole class. Preston showed up with his wife and a gift that was extravagantly wrapped, which Lily appreciated deeply. Evelyn arrived at 2:15. Lily opened the door. She'd positioned herself near it for the last 20 minutes under the pretense of looking for something in the front closet, and said, "You came," with the quiet satisfaction of someone ticking an item off a mental list. "I said I would," Evelyn said. "Some people say they will and then don't," Lily said. "I know," Evelyn said. "I'm not one of them." Lily considered her seriously. "Your chair is a different purple than my cake." Evelyn looked at the cake, which Adrian had set on the kitchen table. "It's a very good purple, though. Did your dad make that?" "He made 2, Lily said confidentially. "The first one looked like a mountain." "Lily," Adrian said from the kitchen. "It did," Lily said unapologetically. He watched Evelyn navigate the apartment, the small logistics of it, the doorway widths, the placement of furniture. He'd moved a few things earlier in the week, casually, without mentioning it. Just made certain the pathways were clear. She didn't acknowledge it. He hadn't expected her to. His mother found a moment to pull him into the kitchen under the pretense of refilling the chip bowl. "She seems capable," his mother said, which was high praise in his mother's vocabulary. "She is," he said. His mother paused, and he recognized the pause. "We work together," he said. I know that, she said. That's not what I asked. He looked at her. She looked back with the particular patience of a woman who had been waiting for her son to say something real for a very long time and had decided she could wait a little longer. It's complicated, he said. Most things worth having are, she said, and went back to the party. Later, after the cake and the singing and Lily opening her presents with the focused intensity she brought to most things, Adrian found himself standing near the window with Evelyn while Lily held court on the couch, explaining to Preston's wife the significance of a particular stuffed animal she'd received. She's remarkable, Evelyn said. She has opinions, he said. That's what makes her remarkable. A pause. She told me earlier that she thinks you're the best dad in the world, but that you worry too much. He looked over at Lily, who was currently demonstrating something about the stuffed animal's ear that apparently required very specific hand gestures. She's not wrong about the worrying. No, Evelyn said, she's not. They stood there for a moment. The afternoon light was going golden through the windows, the way April light did when it was finally deciding to mean it. The apartment was full of noise. Lily's voice, his mother laughing at something Preston said, Mrs. Patterson asking someone about the purple cake. I owe you something, he said. Evelyn looked at him. What? You called me when you didn't have to. You could have brought in any security contractor. You went looking for the original records and you found my name and you picked up the phone. He paused. I don't take that for granted. She was quiet for a moment. I went looking because the pattern didn't make sense, she said. I found your name because you documented everything carefully enough that it was there to find. I called you because you were the right person. She looked at him steadily. I didn't do you a favor. I made the correct decision based on the evidence available. You could have made a different decision and justified it, he said. I could have, she agreed. I didn't. He turned to look at the window, at the street below, at the April afternoon going about its business. He thought about a year and a half ago, the cardboard box, the cold sidewalk outside Vantex's lobby, the city moving around him while he stood still with a chipped, succulent pot in his hands. He thought about what it meant to come back from something like that. Not triumphantly. Real returns didn't feel triumphant. They felt gradual, and sometimes ungainly, and full of mornings where you had to remind yourself what you were doing and why before the coffee kicked in. They felt like making pasta on autopilot and reading dragon books in rotation and setting up a folding divider in your living room and doing the next thing and the thing after that, and not stopping even when the reasons for not stopping felt thin. He had not, in any moment of the past year and a half, felt like a man reclaiming his destiny. He'd felt like a man doing what needed to be done because there was a small child who needed him functional and a system that needed rebuilding and a record that needed to be set straight. And those were concrete things with concrete requirements, and he was someone who responded to concrete requirements. The result was the same either way, but how you got there mattered. Whether you understood yourself as a hero of your own story or just as someone who kept showing up, that mattered in terms of who you became on the other side of it. He'd kept showing up. That was all. And the sum of all those ordinary mornings had turned out to be enough. Daddy! Lily's voice across the room. We're doing the candles again because Marcus's mom just got here and she didn't see. Marcus came? Adrian said. I invited him, Lily said, with the composure of someone who had decided forgiveness was a practical position. He's been better about the tricycle. Evelyn made a sound that was almost a laugh. He looked at her. The tricycle has a long history, he said. I've gathered, she said. He pushed off from the window. Candles, he said. Go, she said. He crossed the apartment. His mother was already relighting the 6 candles on the purple cake. Lily was arranging herself in front of it with the serious posture she adopted for important events. Marcus was standing nearby with his mother, looking slightly uncertain, and Lily reached over and touched his arm briefly. A 5-second gesture, already moving on. And he relaxed. Adrian stood behind her. The candles were lit. Everyone sang. Lily closed her eyes with the focus of someone making a wish that mattered. Though she'd told him once that she didn't believe in birthday wishes, she believed in making plans. He didn't know if she was making a wish or a plan. Both, maybe. They weren't always different things. She blew out the candles. Everyone clapped. She opened her eyes and looked immediately at Adrian, checking. The way she always did, across rooms, in crowds. In any situation where something had just happened, finding him, confirming he was there. He was there. She smiled. Not at the party, not at the room. At him specifically. The small private smile of a kid who knew what she had. He thought about Rachel the way he always did in the moments when Lily's face did something that was entirely her mother's. He let himself think about it without flinching. Not all the way, because there were layers he still couldn't visit without cost. But enough. Enough to acknowledge that grief and joy occupied the same space in a person, that you could hold both without one canceling the other, that the fact of missing someone could coexist with the fact of being, in this moment, on this ordinary April afternoon, genuinely happy. He hadn't expected to be happy again. Not like this. Not the quiet, solid kind that didn't require anything from the moment, except for it to be what it was. He cut the cake. He handed Evelyn the first piece, which Lily had told him to do because Evelyn was the special guest, and Evelyn said thank you and ate it with the same focused attention she brought to most things, and then said it was very good, and meant it. Later, after people had gone, after his mother had fallen asleep on the couch with the television on low, after Lily had been put to bed still holding the stuffed animal and wearing an expression of total satisfaction, Adrian sat at his desk. Not behind the folding divider, which he'd moved to the storage closet last month because the living room felt big enough now, or he felt settled enough, or both, and looked at nothing in particular. The succulent was on the corner of the desk, 2 new growth points and a third starting. He thought about the things you couldn't plan for. He thought about a phone call on an ordinary Tuesday morning, Lily eating cereal, a woman's voice saying, "I know what you built, and I know what was done to you." He thought about what it cost to be the kind of person who documents everything, who keeps the originals, who doesn't leave even when leaving would be easier. Not because you know you'll need it someday, but because it's right. Because accuracy matters. Because the truth of a thing should be preserved somewhere, even if no one ever looks. Sometimes no one ever looks. That's the harder version of the story. The version that doesn't resolve, and there are people living that version right now, carrying the weight of things done to them that will never be formally corrected. And he didn't know what to say about that, except that it was real and it was wrong, and he held it with something that wasn't quite guilt and wasn't quite gratitude, but was somewhere in between. What he knew was this. He had not been waiting for someone to save him. He had been doing the next thing and the thing after that, keeping his daughter fed and his records accurate and his skills sharp, and when the moment came, he was ready for it. Not because he'd been preparing for a confrontation, but because he'd been, in every ordinary way, refusing to disappear. That was the whole of it, the refusing to disappear. The quiet, daily, undramatic insistence on still being exactly who you were. He turned off the desk lamp. He checked on Lily, asleep, stuffed animal tucked under her chin now, the birthday girl at peace with the day she'd had. He went to bed. Tomorrow there would be work, and pick up at 3, and Preston asking questions, and Evelyn's precise morning emails, and the slow legal machinery continuing to turn in the background, and all the ordinary ongoing weight of a life that was, improbably and not without cost, his again. He closed his eyes. Outside, the city was doing what cities do at night, never fully quiet, always slightly restless. The particular ambient hum of a million people all carrying their own versions of this exact same thing. The complicated, imperfect, quietly stubborn work of continuing. He slept.